The deeper we investigate the past, the more fragile our accepted history begins to feel. Especially when we look beyond the 18th century, the evidence becomes strangely thin, fragmented, and often contradictory. At a certain point, the official timeline stops feeling solid and starts raising uncomfortable questions. And one of the most unsettling questions isn't hidden in secret archives. It's right beneath our feet, in the oldest parts of our cities. Across Europe, North America, Australia, and even Siberia, the same strange pattern appears. Massive 18th and 19th century buildings with doors that open directly into the ground. Windows that seem designed to look into solid earth. Entire floors, complete with tall ceilings, ornate stonework, and detailed craftsmanship buried below modern street level. We're told this happened because of something called a cultural layer, a slow buildup of soil over time. It sounds reasonable until you stop and think. How could 10 or even 15 feet of earth accumulate in just 1 or 2 centuries? Why would architects design grand entrances that lead nowhere, or windows meant to provide light that would soon be swallowed by dirt? This doesn't look like gradual accumulation. It looks like sudden burial. Not sinking buildings, buried ones. And this phenomenon isn't local. It's global. Which raises an unsettling possibility. What if this layer beneath our cities isn't cultural at all? What if it's the physical evidence of a large-scale catastrophe, something powerful enough to blanket entire urban centers in mud, sand, and debris? If that's true, then these basements might not be basements at all. They could be the ground floors of a forgotten world. To understand what buried our cities, we first need to ask a deeper question. What kind of world existed before it happened? Because when we lift our eyes from the buried windows and study the buildings themselves, something extraordinary emerges. Across continents supposedly isolated from one another, we see the same architectural language. Massive stone columns. Perfect symmetry. Domes, porticos, spires, all built with a level of precision that seems impossible for the technology we're told existed at the time. From Chicago's old civic buildings to Buenos Aires, from Kolkata to Melbourne, from St. Petersburg to remote Siberian towns, the same design principles appear again and again. We're told this was simply a fashion. Neoclassical architecture, copied around the world. But that explanation raises serious questions. How did young nations with limited infrastructure suddenly construct monumental stone buildings rivaling ancient Rome? How did frontier towns, still using horse carts and hand tools, build structures that modern engineers struggle to replicate today? And how were these designs shared globally without modern communication, logistics, or heavy machinery? Perhaps these buildings weren't copied. Perhaps they were inherited. What if they belonged to a single, earlier civilization, one that existed before a catastrophic event buried its cities and erased its memory? A civilization that understood stone, energy, and construction in ways we no longer do. Look closely at the rooftops. The metal domes. The spires. The antenna-like structures. What if these weren't decorative at all? What if they were components of an energy system harvesting power from the atmosphere itself? If that were true, it would explain everything: the scale, the speed of construction, the purpose of these enormous buildings. They weren't just buildings. They were machines. And what if the people of the 18th and 19th centuries didn't build them, but uncovered them, repaired them, and repurposed them? What if history remembers them as founders when they were, in reality, inheritors? If so, then our cities are not monuments to progress, but stage sets left behind by a lost golden age. A civilization so vast, so unified, that it left the same architectural fingerprint across the entire planet. But if such a world existed, what could have destroyed it? Not local wars. Not regional disasters. The force would have had to be planetary in scale. Something cosmic. Something that struck only a few hundred years ago, close enough to memory to leave traces, but far enough back to be obscured. Old paintings from the late Renaissance and early modern era depict massive ruined cities with tiny human figures wandering among them. We're told these were fantasies, romantic visions of ancient ruins. But what if they were something else? What if they were eyewitness sketches? Maps from earlier centuries showed different coastlines, land bridges where oceans now exist, deserts where fertile lands once were, climate systems breaking down, civilizations vanishing almost overnight. What followed was not complete extinction, but reset. Survivors rebuilt. Between the 1600s and early 1800s, cities rose again in that same global architectural style. A final echo of the old world. A brief renaissance before something darker took control. Because after the rebuilding came consolidation. After recovery came control. History fractured into pieces. Wars that may have been part of a single global conflict were rewritten as separate events. The Napoleonic Wars. The War of 1812. The year without a summer. Massive earthquakes. Citywide fires. Disconnected in textbooks. Linked in reality. And after the physical destruction came something even more powerful, the rewriting of memory. A new timeline. A new education system. A new version of science stripped of anything non-material. The past was stretched, altered, and pushed into myth. Anything that didn't fit was labeled superstition or madness. Those who remembered too much were institutionalized. Massive asylums appeared almost overnight, not small hospitals, but enormous palace-like structures. Places to isolate witnesses. To bury memory without killing the body. By the late 19th century, the reset was complete. And here we are now, walking above buried floors, surrounded by architecture we don't fully understand, repeating a story we've never truly questioned. Yet something feels wrong. We sense it in our fascination with old buildings, in our longing for lost knowledge, in the quiet feeling that our world is built on something forgotten. Maybe awakening doesn't require rebellion. Maybe it starts with something simpler. Looking down. Looking closer. And asking why.